Deion Sanders and Colorado have made more history, and football hasn't even started yet. We'll talk about that and more on today's episode of Locked On Buffs.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? This is Locked On Buffs. I am your host, Kevin Borba, and joining me today, John Garcia Jr. John, we're going to be talking recruiting. We're going to be talking some history made by Coach Prime, and that's about it. But it's going to be an action-packed episode. I'm ready to talk. You ready to talk?
Absolutely. I'm glad we're not recording on April 1st because that could have been a little bit funky.
Oof.
And if you follow recruiting on April 1st socially, you know what I mean. So I'm glad we got over that hump. There were some fake commitments, a lot of garbage on that day. So I'm happy we're a couple days into the month. For sure.
Yeah, April 1st is my least favorite day in sports because there's always random reports, and the first one always gets me because I'm never thinking of April Fool's Day. I'm just like, oh, this is a Saturday in this instance, and it's like something completely random and crazy, and I'm glad we didn't have to deal with the shenanigans. But the programs around the country are going to have to deal with Coach Prime's quote-unquote shenanigans, and they're good shenanigans if you're a Colorado fan. He and Colorado have sold out the spring game. We talked about it a few weeks ago. We talked about how it's going to be on ESPN, the lone spring game on ESPN. The back-to-back champ Georgia Bulldogs will be on ESPN2. They're not even on the main ESPN. So Colorado, who went 1-11 last year, has all these new transfers, new faces. They will be on ESPN. There's going to be 45,000 fans. The previous record, and I'll round it up just to make it a whole number, was 18,000. And there's going to be an insane amount of fans, recruits, famous people. Lil Wayne might be in attendance. Who else? We don't even know all the famous people that will show up to support Coach Prime. So, John, talk to me about what it means to sell out the first spring game and kind of continue to build this momentum.
Again, this is another tangible validator, right? We've talked so much about the kind of mythical buzz around Colorado, right? It's been very much, Prime driven, media driven, recruiting driven, all the things that to some really appear as subjective, for lack of a better term. But this is another plant the flag moment for Colorado football and really for Prime. I think for him, this is a true validator because a lot of the stuff that he reversed or changed back at Jackson State was very much football related, right? Surely recruiting upticked and there was more buzz and exposure, but really it was about the football. It was about winning and turning around that program. That was really the true mark for him tangibly of hey, I went and turned this thing around. It's different when you're in the Power 5. It's different when you're in the Pac-12, and this is a huge step in that tangible direction. Selling out a spring game is not common. I think there's not a lot of information about this, but you can go to SEC country, Big Ten country, wherever you want. Selling out a spring game is not typical. And obviously some stadiums are massive, 100,000 people, whatever. But it doesn't rarely come close. And I think that is another, big plant of Colorado, the black and gold flag nationally here. ESPN already kind of took the first step in saying, hey, this is the only game we're going to put on our flagship network, which is still incredible when you look at it compared to Georgia, as you mentioned, and really compared to the schools that frankly have a lot more drama at the coaching or quarterback position, right? Wouldn't you want to see some of these quarterback battles going down at Georgia, at Bama, at Ohio State? I mean, big time programs get that fresh sample. Well, ESPN's like, no, we'll kick that to the side because we want to see Prime. We want to see Colorado. What does it look like? Who's there? Will it sell out? Now we have the answer to that final question. And that was the expectation. And I think, and this is what you wrote over at Athlon, the expectations are now higher than they've ever been, to the point where when you read the tweet or the story on Athlon, hey, Colorado sells out its spring game, you're kind of like, okay, yeah, this is what we thought was going to happen. And I think that alone is a great example of just how much the perception has really flipped in and around Boulder. But this is a huge deal. There's really no other way to put it. National TV exposure, sellout crowd. They've done a good job, Colorado has, with this black and gold day. where there's some buildup to it internally as well. There's an autograph signing period. There's a lot of other events and kind of situations going on in the stadium, almost a fan fest type of atmosphere there, which again is usually relegated to SEC country and some of the programs that you expect to carry that cachet every single year, not the ones coming off of a 1-11 season. So all of this is extremely positive, but I think for the adults, this is another tangible step. You know, for the recruits, for the diehards, the buzz is there and it's not going anywhere almost no matter what. But for everyone else, I think this is another tangible step. Like, hey, this isn't just subjective buzz. It's now tangible. People are paying and reserving as much as they could to get their butts in the seats come April 22nd. And that alone is a really big deal for Colorado football. So the exposure box is checked at Colorado, you know, some months or maybe a year before it was checked at Jackson State, where you really had to get into that regular season, and really the second year, I would say, with Deion, to get that tangible, hey, ESPN's coming down, and now people are talking about it more. At Colorado, it's only taken a couple of months and well before that first official game as the head coach there at Boulder. So congratulations to everybody involved and really to our audience, because this is, you talk about bittersweet and a turnaround. I mean, this is, again, we can't say it enough, 1-11 in 2022 to a marquee spring game that's sold out, coming off of this great recruiting class in the middle of spring ball where there's a lot of turnover going down. I mean, it's really been fascinating, every single layer of this thing. And that sellout is, again, it's just another, you know, the flag is planted. I mean, it's entrenched Baker Mayfield style in the middle of the field for Colorado. And that's, again, it's not something we thought we'd be talking about a couple months back.
Yeah, the excitement's there, and it kind of feels like, and obviously I don't know if this is planned, how it's laid out, but I'm in the South right now. I'm in Texas, and I've seen a few Buc-ee's, like superstore gas station things. And if you're in the South, you know what a Buc-ee's is.
They're
it's
elite.
Yeah, they're elite. They have all the best snacks or whatever it may be. But when you drive to a Buc-ee's, there's like a sign and it's like Buc-ee's in 10 miles. And then the closer you get, there's like Buc-ee's in 5 miles, Buc-ee's in 4 miles. Like there's Buc-ee's. And it feels like we're about 19 days away from the spring game and we're still talking about the spring game. Like, I think the buzz that Coach Prime has generated around Colorado is at a whole new level that programs like Alabama aren't getting this attention right now. Programs like Georgia aren't getting this attention right now. And they're having pro days. They're having guys that are probably going to go in the first round, and they're still not generating as much buzz as Coach Prime in Colorado. So it's unreal to see. And we're going to continue to kind of track it and see what happens as time goes on. Before we move on, guys, the Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have your favorite bar, Puff, and now is your time to make it count. So go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. I'll be voting for the coconut bar or Puff, either way. And if you want your favorite team to win, then you'll be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or Puff. And when you vote for your bar or Puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or Puffs delivered straight to your door. You got to try Built. Built's the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they're so amazing you won't think they're good for you. What makes Built bars and Puffs so good? Well, for starters, they're all high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate, not that fake stuff. Run to builtmarchmadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or Puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. Obviously, March is over, but the March Madness game there's still one more game. The championship between San Diego State and UConn. The two states I lived in, California and Connecticut, just going at it. We'll call it the Kevin Borba championship. Moving on, we got to talk about the spring game, kind of in a way. Still, one of the marquee visitors that a few months ago confirmed that he was coming has officially confirmed he's not coming. Colin Simmons, the 5-star edge rusher out of Duncanville, Texas, recently tweeted that he will not be in attendance for Colorado spring game. He didn't say that he would not make it back to Colorado, but the week before he announced his decision to not attend the spring game, he was interviewed by On3, and basically, I don't want to say he hinted at, because he basically said clear as day he wants to play in the SEC. And so all of the schools that he listed was LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, Texas, who will be in the SEC by the time he's in college. And so I think obviously he's probably SEC bound. John did tell me before the show he's planning to go see Oregon, and I think the other one was USC. But obviously he has a hankering for SEC football. So I'll say it's disappointing for Colorado fans that he won't be in attendance, but I think this will probably be the only recruiting challenge that Coach Prime ever faces at Colorado, and it's guys that just solely want to play in the SEC. He'll be able to convince some of them to flip and some of them to not go play in the SEC because he has the allure factor. He has the Coach Prime effect. He's a polarizing figure. He's more polarizing than Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, whoever it is. It's just some guys really just want to play in the SEC. That patch on their chest means a lot to them, and so there's nothing you can do about it, right, John?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a lot of this talk has been relative to Colorado, right? But when you zoom out, of course, look, there's still, and Prime will say this, anybody will say it, there's still so much work to be done. There have been splashes in recruiting. There have been a heck of a visitor list already in this class of 2024 that has already been to Boulder. And obviously the spring game will be the apex of that. And as we get closer, I know we'll talk about a lot of the names, Williams Nowerney, Jordan Johnson, Rebel, Winston Watkins, who we'll talk about a little bit later. The visitor list is going to be crazy with or without Colin Simmons. But yeah, if you zoom out, there's still a lot of work to be done to get on that certain level with five-star, especially defensive recruits, I feel like, because there's such a pipeline from the SEC. And look, Colin's grown up in Texas, and he's already visited, the bulk of SEC country and understands the allure there. It's just a little bit different. It's one of those things that there's a certain group of kids, as you said, Kevin, that is just going to parade and peruse SEC country when you have all the offers in college football. But this staff will continue chipping away, I think, at Simmons and at other recruits that either commit elsewhere or appear like they're headed elsewhere, because it's still very early, so I do think that's important. But yeah, you understand optically from the SEC perspective why recruits want to play in that conference, all of the national titles that we continue talking about. And then you watch the draft and the SEC, I think, doubled the second best conference over the last 10 years or so in terms of draft picks. So again, we talk about tangible and how this is a tangible big deal for Colorado to sell out the spring game. Well, tangibly, the SEC is just kind of where it's at right now in college football. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but off the top of my head, you got to go back, 9-10 years before the last non-SEC champion. That was Ohio State back in 2014. And even before that, it was another run of SEC schools. You think of the Florida dynasty, Bama getting cranked up under Nick Saban, a sprinkle of Florida State in the ACC. But really, over the last 20 years, you're talking about a few non-SEC national titles, and the draft has really been SEC heavy on top of that. So, again, there's a lot of mountain climbing to be done here for Colorado's program, and this is one of those steps. Yes, you're going to get more elite visitors to Boulder than you ever had before. That box is probably already checked, but we should expect that to continue going forward. But you can't grab everyone, and I think that's a good kind of reset reminder, if you will, from a recruiting standpoint. But look, this happens to everybody. You mentioned the school, you mentioned Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, wherever you want to go, USC. This happens to those programs. So this is not something that is the sky is falling kind of moment for Colorado. It's important, and we got to report it, obviously, as journalists, but the sky is not falling. Again, you're losing one 5-star D lineman from the visitor list, but you just gained Williams Nowerney, who's ranked higher than Colin Simmons, I think, across the board among defensive linemen. So it really does push-pull, just like everything in recruiting does. So this is a take it with a grain of salt type of deal, but we'll see what that list looks like as we get closer to the 22nd, and it's going to be ridiculous. It's going to be star-studded. I would venture to say, if not the best, it will be among the best visitor lists across the country. And if you think about where recruits are traveling from, because again, not many are taking official visits for spring games, they're going to Colorado on their own dime, which is really fascinating because, as we know, outside of the Pac-12 footprint, the state of California, these elite recruits are coming from Texas, where Simmons is from. They're coming from the Midwest, where Nowerney is from. They're coming from Florida, where Winston Watkins is from. They're coming from Georgia. They're coming across the country in a lot of cases to get to Boulder on the same day that a lot of great programs are hosting their spring games. So that alone is a victory for Colorado, and plus or minus one recruit is not going to change that field.
Yeah, and I think, which I wrote about on Athlon, you guys could go check it out. I have like a running list of who's coming to the spring game, and I made sure to put where everybody's from because I think during this time period, mostly nobody's taking official visits. And so an unofficial visit means mom and dad or whoever you live with,
Somebody.
they're paying for the visit. So they're paying for you to get on the flight. They're paying for the hotel and they're paying for everything in between. And so there's people from Missouri, there's people from Dylan Stewart, the number one ranked player according to On Threes, coming from DC. So a lot of people coming from everywhere. It was just a notable player. So Colin Simmons is someone that we obviously have to talk about. But yeah, I thought it was interesting, and I do think if Coach Prime is going to have a recruiting challenge, and I'm not saying he won't flip a bunch of recruits that want to play in the SEC because he probably will. I think Travis Hunter was seconds away from going to Georgia, and then all of a sudden, or Florida State, or whatever it may be, and then all of a sudden, here comes Jackson State and Coach Prime, and so there's an excitement around Coach Prime that will forever help him in recruiting. And there's just going to be a few guys that they have the SEC on the mind. We start to see it more and more now when guys get their SEC offers, they immediately make a top 10 and it's literally like the top 10 SEC schools. And then they decide from there. It's just how powerful the SEC is. But Coach Prime has just as much power as any coach in the country. So it will be fascinating to see who is actually showing up. And that's something that Josh Newberg talked about when he was on the show with us, because that was about 2 weeks ago, I would say. And we discussed the names and he was like, that's great and all, but we have to see who officially goes.
Yeah,
a lot of things in recruiting change. A lot of times recruits will say one thing, then do the other. I think of guys like Zach Evans, who committed to like two or three different schools, then ended up at TCU
and transferred.
and then transferred. And then there's guys that take their recruitment all the way down to the hat pool. We saw this past year. He ended up at Oklahoma. I think his name was Peyton Bowen.
Yep.
He was going to Oregon, Notre Dame, and all of a sudden he's going to Oklahoma because his paper didn't send to Oregon fast enough or something. And so recruits always change their mind. So nothing too crazy, just something that we had to talk about. So don't go too crazy in the comments down there. We appreciate your passion, but don't go too crazy on us. Moving on, John, and we're going to close this out on a positive note. Someone who will be at the spring game, actually, he just announced yesterday, Winston Watkins Jr., the 5-star recruit out of IMG, which is, if you don't know, the football factory in Florida, if you will, and for any sport, really. They just produce, that's where everybody goes to train. Winston Watkins Jr. is currently Colorado's lone 2025 commit, a 5'9"-ish receiver who is a 5-star according to 24/7. But he's currently on his way up to being ranked as the number one receiver, according to Rivals. And so John wrote about on Athlon. So I'll let John dive in right here. Tell us a little bit about what he brings to the table, why he's making that push. And even though he's not the biggest guy, he's still an electric receiver.
Well, I think let's start there, right? Because that's the first thing that kind of grabs your attention. If you're just clicking on a recruiting profile, you're like 5'9", 180. How can this be a guy, even in the conversation, for the number one wide receiver spot? And I think that alone tells you just how electric Winston Watkins is. Of course, most people know his cousin, Sammy Watkins, of course, of Clemson All-American fame and many NFL stops thereafter. But Sammy's big. Sammy's like 6'2", with great vertical speed. Winston is a little bit more compact. He actually reminds me a little bit more of another Florida native who really, it was just like when he was going through recruiting, it was like, man, I don't know who's going to get this kid, but wherever he goes, he's going to produce and probably play on Sundays. His name was Elijah Moore, slot receiver from St. Thomas Aquinas, ends up at Ole Miss. I think he caught like 100 balls for Lane Kiffin there his final year at Ole Miss, and he's been making plays in the NFL ever since. That's the kind of game Winston brings to the table. At 5'9", 180, he's compact. He's incredibly strong pound for pound, and I think that's something we don't talk about enough with receivers in general, which means at the line of scrimmage, he's able to combat the press a little bit more because he's strong pound for pound, compact, smaller target area for defensive backs to get their hands on him. And that strength also shows up at the top of the routes because Winston is a clinical, polished route runner. So you can have speed, you can have quickness, explosiveness, great hands, all of that. But if you can't put route combinations together, when you're playing in Florida at IMG in particular, sometimes it don't matter how physically gifted you are. But I think that's where Winston's polish has allowed for others to kind of say, hey, I don't care how small he is. This guy is a clinical, technical route runner to where he is setting up defensive backs at the line of scrimmage and at the top of the route. And sometimes thereafter with his quickness and his route construction, double moves in and out. I mean, this kid is one of those that it looks pretty no matter what route he's running. And that's not something we say about a lot of wide receivers. But on top of that, he has that strength we mentioned, and he's got this speed, this quickness that he gets to top speed in a hurry. That's one of the advantages of being a little bit smaller. And I think the conversation around that type of wide receiver has shifted in the sport overall as these spread offenses have become more prevalent. This is something that isn't as big of a worry as it used to be, similar to smaller quarterbacks, right? We're not worried about it as much. I mean, Bryce Young is 5'10" and a quarter or whatever, and he could be the number one pick in the draft. At receiver, we're seeing very similar shifts. I mean, Zay Flowers is a great example who's going to go maybe in the first round this year out of Boston College, 5'9", 5'10", but man, just so productive, so explosive, and just hard to contain. You know, these players like Watkins, Flowers, et cetera, Elijah Moore, they can almost serve as extensions of the running game, right? Throw them a bubble screen and let them cook in space. You know, bigger defenders are just too sloppy to compete with their quickness. And the smaller, faster guys are still struggling because the routes are so precise. And on top of it, Winston's got these ball skills that make you think he's 6'2". You know, it's like kind of DeAndre Hopkins-esque where you're like, you see him make plays and you're like, oh, DeAndre Hopkins must be 6'5", the way he's making these catches and extending his body. And then you look him up and you're like, oh, he's 5'11", 6 foot. Like, I had no idea. Plays a lot bigger than that listed size suggests. He was at the Rivals camp in Miami just a couple weekends ago and really stole the show. He was the far and away overall MVP, receiver MVP, and really the marquee moment was a double move showcasing that route running construction and a one-handed catch in the back of the end zone showcasing those ball skills that, again, maximize his frame and make you think he's a lot bigger than he actually is. So that combined with the modern asks of the position, it doesn't hurt you to be that size. But for him to even be in the conversation for number one receiver is a really big deal. He led IMG in receiving last year over Carnell Tate, who was a 5-star 6'2" receiver that's now at Ohio State. I mean, Winston's got yeah, Winston's got a lot of juice. So this is a guy Colorado fans should absolutely be excited about. And he's from Fort Myers, where Coach Prime is from. Looked up to him his whole life, as you would imagine, being from that area. And I think he was one of the first overall commits for Colorado. I think he committed before it was even official, with Prime taking the job. All the reports were out, and Watkins was like, hey, I've seen enough. And he was committed to Texas A&M before that. So you lose some SEC battles with Colin Simmons, but you win one with a Winston Watkins, who I think is going to be a banner recruit for Colorado over the next couple of cycles. So it's a big deal, even though he's just 2025, for him to be in that number one conversation and to wear that Colorado commitment proudly.
Yeah, I think he could get the 2025 class started quickly because obviously they're focusing on 2024, but they will put some effort into 2025 to get it going. And having their class currently ranks as, I think, the number 3 class according to 24/7, and he's the lone commit. He's just ranked that high.
Yeah.
But when you have one guy like that who kind of has the cachet of an IMG receiver, he's considered the number 1 receiver by some sites, and he's already committed to you, and he's already said that he's going to be going to Colorado if Coach Prime is there. So basically, as long as Coach Prime is on the premise, he will be a Buff. That's a big building block for other recruits to kind of see. He could bring guys along with him. He could do some recruiting along the way. But yeah, that backhanded, because not only was that catch that John's talking about a one-handed catch where he had the defender all over him, he backhanded it, which is
gross.
Something we only see with like OBJ during warmups, and he's just doing it for fun. He actually did it in a game-like scenario, so that was insane to see. But yeah, very exciting. He's going to be at the spring game. A lot of stars at the spring game, so don't let Colin Simmons hold over you guys. The spring game is sold out. New era of Colorado football, new era of college football. We might be seeing the emergence of a new power, so that'll be exciting to see. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Buffs your first listen today. For your second listen, check out a brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Experts Isaac Shaw and Andy Patton bring you everything you need to know on and off the court, plus hear from big-name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. This has been Locked On Buffs. We are also available on wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers. Let's get there.
Yes, please.
Let's just keep it going. Let's keep make sure to follow along for all the breaking news and all the stories and breakdowns that we have for you guys. We will see you guys tomorrow. John, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me, boss.